morning she came home. The lake was quiet, too quiet. Clara Whitmore set her husband's pocket watch on the table. It hadn't ticked since the day he died. Next to it lay an envelope stamped Holton Partners. Inside, her own signature, steady and perfect, signed away. "Half her house," she whispered. "I don't remember signing this." Then she noticed the second name below hers, Evan Whitmore. Her son. The clock stayed silent, but in her chest, something louder began to count. The cab rolled away and left me with the smell of pine and cold water. I stood at the foot of the porch, one hand on my cane, the other on the rail where David had sanded the splinters down, but never got around to staining it. The lake gave a soft, cold breath. It felt like the house exhaled with it inside. Winter dust made a thin film over everything we'd rebuilt. This was an old lifeguard station once. David turned it into a home, the way patient men do, one shelf at a time, one joke at a time. The tower still leaned near the shed, a rib of weathered wood. In the hallway, his handprint lived under a skim of primer. He swore he'd finish. He didn't. Some promises are meant to remain human. My cane clicked over the floorboards. Each click sounded too loud for a place that had known so many summer voices. I opened the front windows. The frames stuck for a breath, then lifted with a sigh that carried the lake in with it. The air smelled like iron and wet leaves. I could almost hear the old rescue bell by the dock shifting in the wind. Deciding whether to speak on the kitchen table, I set down the pocket watch. It had not ticked since the week he died, yet I still treated it like a beating thing. Next to it lay a neat folder, in Evan's handwriting, House Finances. The letters were confident. My son always wrote like he was sure of the next line. He lives 2 hours away now, in a place with glass elevators and a coffee shop that spells your name wrong on purpose. He calls when meetings end early or when traffic stalls. Sabrina answers more than he does. She has a PR person's voice, smooth as a brochure. "We've been helping you streamline, Mom. You'll feel so much lighter." I didn't know my life weighed that much at the rehab center. Nurses praised my boy. "He was here every form you needed signed," they said. "He handled everything." Such a generous verb. Handled, a verb that smiles while it moves the furniture. I keep telling myself. I imagine the other voices. Pain medicine gives you strange honesty, then steals it back, but the memory returns with the same rhythm as my cane. A man, steady, a woman. Near my ear, "Just get the documents transferred. Before she wakes up, she'll thank us later." The doctor used kind words like hallucination, words that fit nicely into discharge papers. I wanted to borrow his confidence. Instead, I borrowed time and brought it home in a silent watch. I moved through the rooms slowly, as if the house might forget me if I went too fast. The den still smelled faintly of varnish and lake mud. The chair David preferred creaked in the same complaining way when I sat. I rested my palm where his elbow had worn the arm smooth. It was the only place in the house that had learned to fit us. Both. The folder waited. Inside were bank statements, all numbers behaving themselves, each line ending in a polite decimal. Tucked between them sat a letterhead, Holt and Partners, assuring me of joint custodianship and risk mitigation and comfort in your golden years. I used to write letters like that for clients, trust printed in serif type, as if the font could do the heavy lifting. A sticky note in Evan's ink. "Mom, this consolidates everything. Fewer accounts, less stress." Sign where highlighted yellow flags glowed on the signature lines like caution tape on a quiet street. I traced the slope of my own name, reproduced by machine. It looked obedient. It did not look like me. The lake answered a gust with a shiver. I stood and watched the ice field white, then gray, then thin where the current pressed from beneath. The cracks were delicate at first, hair thin and harmless. Then one ran longer than the others. The sound reached the shore a moment later, soft, decisive, like fabric torn in another room. When Evan was small, he used to pretend he was the one who rang the rescue bell. "Someone needs me," he'd shout, and run toward the dock with a kitchen towel tied around his shoulders. I believed him. I wanted him to believe it too. Now his emergencies came with logins and a battery bar that runs red by afternoon. "I'm doing my best, Mom," he says, as if the sentence could turn itself into proof back at the table. I lifted the watch, cold metal, no heartbeat. I pressed the stem, more habit than hope. Silence. On the back, the tiny engraving David insisted on. "Still us," he said it on the day we moved in. The two of us laughing at a leaky roof and a floor that tilted our coffee east. "Even if it all falls apart," he'd said, "it's still us." Years later, he left first. The house listened to me learn another way to breathe. I walked to the bedroom and opened the closet. Hospital clothes hung like borrowed weather. A discharge bracelet lay in the dish with screws and coins, and a blue guitar. Pick a neighbor kid left behind in July. I could still smell a clean, sharp scent from those weeks' antiseptic, and something sweet, a small deceit that makes sickness taste like gum. A memory slid under the door, the sound of my pen on a clipboard, the way the nurse steadied my hand, initial here, here, and here, she had said, patient and kind. "This just allows your son to help." The word "just" is a bridge people lower when they need you to cross. Something in me planted its heels then. Not anger, not yet. Something older, a simple refusal to be moved by language that wasn't exact. I carried the folder to David's desk. The lamp's pull chain clicked on. The light was honest and a little cruel. I read, not as a mother, not as a patient, but as the woman I had been before everyone decided I needed help. Terms layered into more terms. Definitions feeding even smaller definitions. Somewhere inside the nesting dolls of courtesy lay the point I had agreed, apparently, to share the keys to my own house outside. The rescue bell finally chose to speak, one low clang. Then quiet. I closed the folder and slid it beneath the watch. If they wanted me dulled by gratitude, they should have left me asleep. I stood, and the floor accepted my weight. In the window, a thin path of open water crept along the reeds. The ice did not see it coming. And then it was there. I spoke to the room, because the room had never lied to me. "I will find out what was signed, and why, and by whose hand." The lake, honest as ever, gave back the only answer. "It has a small wave against the dock," and then another. Suspicion didn't roar. It rooted the next morning. I heard a knock on the door, soft, practiced, and polite. When I opened it, Sabrina stood there with a bouquet of lilies. She smelled like expensive perfume and calculation. "Mom," she said, "you look wonderful." We were worried. Her smile was gentle, the kind that sells trust in small doses. I stepped aside. She moved around the kitchen like she owned the rhythm of it. "Evan wanted to come," she said, setting the flowers in a chipped vase. "But the market's been unpredictable. You know how he gets when numbers start falling." I nodded, because I did know, and because I wanted her to keep talking. She poured tea without asking, as if she'd done it here 100 times. "You should relax," she continued. "Holt and Partners is just helping you organize investments, nothing big. You'll thank us when you see how well your assets perform." Her words were sugar coating on a nail. I smiled back. "I'm sure you and Douglas have everything under control." She didn't answer that, just straightened a picture frame and said, "You raised a wonderful son." When she left, the house felt smaller. I sat at the table, the lilies already bending in their vase. The folder with the yellow tabs was still where I'd hidden it. I took it out and opened the bank summary account. Joint custodianship, 2 names, Clara Whitmore, Evan Whitmore below them. Transaction logs, clean, dated, efficient. A withdrawal transferred to Holt and Partners. Division of acquisitions. My breath caught in the quiet. I had taught Evan to balance a checkbook when he was 9. I told him, Money is only dangerous when it starts to think for you now. The lesson was coming home with teeth. I stared at the figures until they blurred. It wasn't the amount that hurt. It was the signature beside it. My name, obedient and perfect, authorizing what I never agreed to. I took the documents to the desk and called Margaret. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since she left banking to teach financial forensics. Her voice sounded exactly the same. Clear, logical, steady. Clara, she said after listening. Send me a copy. Right now by evening. She called back. This isn't a mistake, she said. It's a model. They target widows, retirees, anyone recently hospitalized. They build trust through family, through children. It's called co-managed consolidation. Legally gray, morally black. I gripped the phone until my knuckles ached. Evan wouldn't, maybe not knowingly. She interrupted, but the signatures, the timing, the transfers, they're coordinated. Douglas Holt has a record. Quiet settlements, non-disclosures. It's all hidden under legitimacy. The room tilted slightly, like a boat shifting weight. For years I believed in systems, contracts, banks, partnerships. I believed people did wrong only when desperate. But this was design. After we hung up, I sat there listening to the clock, not David's pocket watch, but the one on the wall. Each second sounded like a verdict. I looked out the window. The lake reflected a sky split between sun and storm, light fighting to stay above the clouds. Somewhere out there, my son was convincing himself that this was helping me. Maybe he even believed it that night. I made tea and read through every page. The pattern was precise. Every joint account, linked to Holt and Partners' secondary fund. Each client had a family contact. Each transfer disguised as asset alignment. There was nothing sloppy, nothing emotional, just arithmetic in disguise. I found an old photo tucked in the file, one from the summer David, and I built the deck. Evan, no older than 10, sat between us with paint on his nose. The caption on the back, always build together. I felt something split quietly. Inside me they say betrayal shouts, but it doesn't. It whispers through paperwork, through calm explanations, through words like streamline and trust me. I realized the trap wasn't new. It had started the moment I stopped reading my own statements. The moment I believed help meant safety. I called Margaret again before midnight. If they can do this through family, I said. How many others are they doing it? Too many, she answered. And most won't fight back. Because it's their children signing the forms. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a sickness spreading quietly across dinner tables and family photos. Where love turned into leverage, and age into opportunity. There's a name for it now. Margaret told me later, filial alienation. It's what happens when children forget the soil that raised them and see their parents only as property. I sat in the dark, folder open, hand steady. I wasn't angry yet. Anger requires certainty, and I only had suspicion. But something older than anger, older than motherhood itself, began to wake. I turned the lamp off and whispered into the quiet. I may be old, but I remember everything outside. The wind lifted across the lake, scattering ripples like signatures across the surface. Small, deliberate, impossible to erase. There's a silence that grows inside families long before the arguments begin. It doesn't start with money or even words. It starts when someone quietly decides, I don't owe you anything anymore. Evan was never cruel. He was never a monster. He was simply afraid of failing, afraid of looking small next to the people who measured success in ownership and control. And when the weak want to feel strong, they don't lift others. They start managing them. I used to think betrayal looked like shouting, like slammed doors or broken glass, but in truth, it sounds more like paperwork, like Mom, we just want to help, or this is what's best for you. That's how distance builds. Not with fights, but with gentle voices convincing you to step aside. I looked at Evan's signature under mine, and thought of the little boy who once held my hand crossing icy bridges, somewhere between then and now. He stopped seeing me as the woman who raised him, and started seeing me as an asset to reorganize, and that is the quiet tragedy of our time. People talk about broken families, as if it's about greed, but it's not always greed. Sometimes it's confusion, a generation taught to measure worth by productivity, and to treat aging as a liability. So when they see their parents slow down, they don't feel compassion, they feel discomfort. They don't know how to love what no longer earns, or produces. There's even a term for it now. Margaret once told me filial alienation it means when your own child becomes a stranger, not because they hate you, but because they no longer understand you, because their world has replaced gratitude with independence. And independence with detachment. Evan wasn't trying to destroy me. He was trying to survive in a system that rewarded distance, but still it hurt, because the hand that signed those papers was the same one that once reached for mine. When the storm scared him, I sat there, realizing that the line between love and control can be paper thin. And sometimes, signed in ink, the betrayal wasn't the money. It was the moment he stopped seeing me as home, and started treating me like property. That night, as I looked across the lake, I understood something I wish I didn't. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who believe they're helping, and sometimes the only way to love them is to stop being blind to what they've become. The meeting room was colder than I expected. The walls were glass, polished to the point where my reflection looked like a stranger, older, quieter, smaller. The table stretched long and white between us. At one end, Douglas Holt adjusted his cufflinks. At the other, I folded my hands and waited. Sabrina smiled first. She always did, Mom. She began, soft and rehearsed. We just need to finalize a few things. Nothing's changing, really. This is just for your protection. Protection. That word again. It had become the polite mask for control. Douglas cleared his throat, sliding a thin stack of papers across the table. Mrs. Whitmore, he said in a voice that could sell snow to winter, this agreement ensures your assets are safeguarded, legally sound, no risk. I looked at the papers, then at him. Safeguarded from what? Smiled tight. Corporate. From complication. Evan sat beside Sabrina, eyes fixed on his watch. I waited for him to look at me. He didn't. When the silence stretched too long, he muttered, Mom, it's just formality. Everyone does it now. Everyone. The word was supposed to comfort me, but it only erased me. I turned a page. My name appeared in bold, right next to his. Joint custodianship. There. It was the word that pretends to share, but really divides. I already have a custodian, I said quietly. Myself. Sabrina leaned forward, voice dripping patience. We're not taking anything from you. We're just simplifying things. You won't even notice a difference. She smiled, as if the conversation were about choosing wallpaper. Douglas placed a pen in front of me. Just a few signatures, Mrs. Whitmore. You'll have peace of mind. Peace of mind. Another phrase that means silence. I studied the pen. It wasn't the one I used before the accident. The ink was darker, heavier. Maybe they thought a new pen would make the old mistakes disappear. I glanced at Evan. He was still looking down, jaw tight, thumb brushing the edge of his wedding ring. Evan, I said, do you believe this is right? Hesitated. His shoulders rose, fell. It's for the best, Mom. You have to trust us. Trust. The word that had been dying between us for years finally stopped breathing. I took a slow breath and picked up the pen. The sound it made on paper was thin, mechanical, almost hollow. Each line felt like a small surrender, but also a seed of proof. I signed not because I trusted them, but because I wanted to see how deep the roots of deceit ran. When I finished, Douglas collected the pages, smiling with practiced courtesy. Excellent. You'll receive a copy within the week. Welcome to your new chapter, Mrs. Whitmore. He extended his hand. I didn't take it. Sabrina broke the silence again. You'll thank us, really. You won't have to worry about bills or decisions. You can finally rest. That's what they wanted, to tuck me away like an account. They no longer needed to explain. I stood slowly. The chair's legs scraped the tile, an unpolished sound in a room too perfect. Thank you, I said. I'll sleep better knowing everything's in capable hands. I left the office before they could answer. Outside, the air was sharper, honest in its coldness. The city hummed with motion cars, people, life moving on without permission. I walked until I reached the corner cafe, where David and I used to stop for tea before his appointments. The same barista was there, older now, still humming quietly. She handed me my order before I asked. You always liked it strong, she said. At home. I placed the folder on the kitchen table. The lilies Sabrina brought were wilting, bending under their own weight. I opened my drawer and pulled out David's pocket watch. It hadn't ticked in years, but I wound it anyway. Just once, and for the first time since the hospital. It made a sound, a single, dry tick, so faint it could have been my imagination. But it was enough to remind me that stillness isn't always surrender. Sometimes, it's preparation. I looked out toward the lake. The water was calm, silver under the fading light. Somewhere beneath that surface, truth waited, quiet, patient, unstoppable. I whispered, David, maybe you are still listening. That night, I locked the documents away, not in fear but in resolve. They thought the battle ended with my signature. They didn't know the war had just begun. 3 days later, Margaret arrived at my house with a leather briefcase and eyes that hadn't slept. We sat at the same kitchen table where Evan once did his homework. The lilies had wilted completely by. Then she opened her laptop, turned it toward me, and said quietly, You need to see this. On the screen were folders, rows of names, ages, addresses, all marked Lake District custodianship files. Every file had the same pattern: elderly homeowners, joint accounts, asset transfers, signatures shaky and half familiar. Margaret zoomed in on one, a man named Harold Simmons, 71, widowed, lost his house 2 months after signing a similar protection contract. Then another, and another. Each story echoed mine, like pages copied from the same cruel manual. I whispered. How Manish exhaled. Dozens, maybe more, all tied to Holt and Partners. And here, look at this one. She clicked on a folder labeled Equity Support Program 2012. My breath stopped. There, in clean type, David Whitmore, equity supporter. For a moment, I didn't understand. My mind rejected it like a bad equation. David, I said, almost laughing. That can't be right. He hated investment schemes. Margaret didn't meet my eyes. He was part of an early partnership. Before Holt went corporate, they were buying old rescue stations to turn into private lodges. The one by your lake was one of them. The world tilted. The air felt heavier, like water pressing against my chest. So the place David promised was ours. Forever had never really been ours. It was a transaction, dressed as devotion. I opened an old drawer where I kept his notebooks, ledger after ledger of careful handwriting. He always recorded everything. Every dollar, every repair, every hour spent sanding wood. I flipped through the pages. The paper soft from years of touch. Then, near the back, I found an entry marked with a red pen. Investment meeting. D. Holt. Lake House future secured. That word secured cut deeper than any blade. I turned to Margaret. He lied to me. Her voice softened. Maybe he thought it would help. Maybe he didn't know who Holt would become. I looked down at the numbers. But he knew it wasn't honest. Outside, the lake was calm. The kind of calm that hides undertow for years. I had built my life on the idea that truth might die, but integrity doesn't. Now, I saw both could rot quietly under the same roof. Margaret tapped the screen again. There's more. Holt's been using that original partnership as a legal cover. It makes it look like you're just continuing David's financial plan. So every piece of deceit carried his fingerprints and mine. By inheritance, I thought of Evan, sitting across from me at that conference table, repeating the same phrases David once did. It's safe, it's smart, it's the future. The pattern wasn't random. It was inherited like an heirloom. No one asked for, I said softly. He learned it from his father. Margaret nodded, and Holt learned it from greed itself. We printed copies of the documents late into the night. The sound of the printer filled the kitchen like a heartbeat for each name. I felt a strange mix of rage and pity. All those people, all those families, believing they were protecting their legacies, when in truth, they were signing them away. When Margaret finally left, I stayed by the table, surrounded by paper and silence. The lamp cast a warm circle over the ledgers, my hands, the pocket watch beside them. It was open, but still, frozen at 10:47, the same time David had died. I traced the glass with my finger. You built this house with lies, I whispered. But I'll save it with truth. The next morning, I made a decision. I packed the documents, labeled every file, and placed them inside a wooden chest, not to hide them, no, to preserve them. Evidence doesn't belong in drawers. It belongs in light. Before closing the lid, I added David's ledger, the same one that began the deceit. It felt like burying a body, not of a person, but of a version of love that no longer existed. I locked the chest and looked out toward the lake. It was the same horizon he used to paint, the same view we both called peace, but now I understood what peace costs and who pays for it. The truth had been waiting for me, quiet and patient. Between old pages and faded ink, it didn't shout. It didn't accuse, it simply asked to be seen. And for the first time in years, I was ready to look. I started forgetting on purpose, or at least, that's what they thought. At the next meeting, I showed up 10 minutes late, clutching my old purse, eyes wandering like a woman chasing her own memories. Douglas Holt stood as I entered, polite as ever. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, smiling with teeth too white for sincerity. We're so glad you could make it. How are you feeling these days? I blinked twice, pretending to search for the words. A little foggy, I murmured. My doctor says I forget things. He smiled wider. That's perfectly all right. We'll help you remember what matters. I laughed softly, as if he were doing me a kindness. He didn't know the pocket watch in my hand wasn't just a sentimental keepsake. Said it, beneath the cracked glass and rusted gears, was a recording device Margaret had helped me hide. Each tick was no longer time. It was evidence. Week after week, I returned to their meetings. I wore beige sweaters, mismatched earrings, and let my sentences drift off halfway. I called Douglas by the wrong name once. Donald was it, and everyone laughed politely. I became what they expected, a sweet, confused woman they could control. But I remembered everything. I remembered how Sabrina once held my hand, promising to protect me. I remembered Evan's eyes, how they wouldn't meet mine when I signed away my life, and I remembered every smirk Douglas gave when he thought I wasn't listening. The final meeting was on a Thursday night. Only 4 of us in the room: Douglas, Sabrina, Evan, and me. The air was heavy with the smell of expensive coffee and betrayal. Douglas leaned back in his chair, confident, careless. The division won't question it, he said. If the old woman loses mental capacity, her son retains full authority. It's airtight. Sabrina's laugh was small and sharp. Then we just have to make sure she's declared unfit. Maybe we call for an evaluation. He didn't move. I just kept tracing circles on my watch, pressing the button once quietly. The red light inside flickered to life. Evan sat across from me, pale and silent. For a moment, I thought I saw doubt in his face, but then he said, barely audible, "She won't fight. She doesn't even remember half of this." That was when I smiled because I knew I had everything I needed 2 days later. Margaret handed the recordings to the Financial Crime Division. Her voice trembled when she called me Clara. They heard it all, the meetings, the plan, every word. I stood by the window, watching snow fall onto the lake. Then it's time, I said. The arrests came fast, police cars slicing through morning fog, sirens breaking the quiet shoreline. Douglas in handcuffs, shouting about misunderstanding Sabrina, crying not out of guilt, but out of fear. And Evan didn't run. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground, as if the earth could swallow the shame for him. They led him past me without words. For a moment, his shoulder brushed mine. He looked up, searching my face for anger, forgiveness, maybe both, but I gave him neither. Only silence. When they were gone, I walked back inside. The watch sat on the table, its faint recording light still blinking, asking if I wanted to save the file. I pressed yes. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that isn't lonely, it's victorious. I poured myself tea, the same way I used to when David came home, late from his business meetings for the first time. I understood what real remembering meant. It's not about clinging to the past, it's about refusing to let lies rewrite it. That night, as the police lights faded across the water, I whispered into the dark, I never forgot. I just waited until forgetting became their weapon and my disguise. The watch ticked once, steady, alive, and for the first time, I didn't flinch at the sound. The news trucks left before sunset. By then, the sirens had faded, and the lake looked like glass again, too calm for what had just happened. A young reporter stopped me at the gate. She couldn't have been more than 25. "Mrs. Whitmore," she asked, breathless, "do you feel satisfied? After everything they did to you?" Her question hung in the air like fog. For a moment, I thought about saying yes, about the justice, the exposure, the noise of handcuffs closing, but instead, I looked past her, toward the water. "No," I said quietly. "Justice doesn't always look like handcuffs." She frowned, waiting for me to explain. "Sometimes," I continued, "justice is a night someone can't sleep, because their conscience finally woke up." She didn't write that down. Maybe it wasn't the headline she wanted, but I wasn't speaking for the paper. I was speaking for myself, because justice isn't always clean. It doesn't erase what was done, or return what was lost. It doesn't give you back your son, or your peace, or the years you spent trusting the wrong people. What it gives you is smaller, quieter. It gives you air, the kind you can finally breathe without trembling. That night, I sat by the window, the one facing the dock. The police tape still fluttered near the boathouse. Somewhere beyond that, Evan was sitting in a holding room, maybe staring at the same kind of silence I once did. And I thought, maybe justice isn't punishment, maybe it's recognition, maybe it's when the world finally admits what you already knew. The pocket watch sat beside me, open, still ticking, not loudly, just steady, patient, alive, like time had been waiting for this moment to start again. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just whispered, "It's enough." And for the first time, it truly was. I spent the next few days cleaning the house, really cleaning it, the kind of cleaning that has nothing to do with dust. The police had taken what they needed. Margaret had gone back to Chicago, and I was alone again, with nothing but the echo of my own choices. When I opened the attic, I found a box I didn't recognize. It was old cedar wood, edges worn smooth by time. Inside, there were papers, photographs, and one small cassette tape. On the label, in David's handwriting, were the words "Lake Project." For a moment, I almost smiled. David recorded everything, his ideas, his plans, even grocery lists. But as I slipped the tape into the old player on the desk, something in my chest tightened, a faint crackle. Then his voice, steady, confident: "Doug, if this goes through, we'll have the rights to the entire North Shore. But don't tell Clara yet. She doesn't need to worry about the details. I froze. Douglas Holt. My hands trembled as I pressed rewind. Then play again. Same words. Same tone. Same casual betrayal wrapped in a business conversation. He'd been part of it. My husband all those years ago. While I cooked dinner and painted the shutters blue. He'd been building the foundation for everything that came after: the contracts, the property, even the partnership name. It was never a coincidence. It was a continuation. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the tape spinning. It was strange how a voice can sound alive long after the person is gone, and yet feel colder than any grave. Margaret called later that night. I didn't tell her about the tape. What would I even say? That my late husband planted the same poison his partner later used against Method. My son was just another inheritor of deceit. Dressed as ambition, he walked down to the dock. The air smelled like rain and pine. The lake was still, the way it always was before a storm. I held the cassette in my hand, feeling the weight of every lie that had ever been called love. For years, I had believed betrayal began with Evan. But now I saw it began long before him. The moment David said, "Don't tell Clara," I whispered the words aloud, as if testing them against the wind. Then I threw the tape into the water. It sank quietly, leaving only circles that faded one by one. Justice, I realized, wasn't about punishing the living or hating the dead. It was about knowing the truth and choosing peace anyway. As I turned back toward the house, I saw the reflection of the porch light trembling on the surface of the lake, the same light David once left on for me when I came home late from work. It looked different now, smaller, softer, honest. I whispered, "Good night, David," not in forgiveness, not in anger, just in closure, because some truths don't need to be kept. They just need to stop echoing. It took me 3 weeks before I decided to visit him. The prison wasn't far, an hour's drive from the lake, but I kept finding reasons to delay. The garden needed tending. The roof leaked. The world, somehow, kept giving me excuses not to face what was left of my son. When I finally arrived, the guard led me to a small glass room. Evan was already there, sitting on the other side, hands clasped, shoulders heavy, like he'd been carrying generations of guilt. He didn't look up right away. I waited in silence. You learn more about someone than words ever reveal. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I just wanted to be like him," he said. "Like Dad." I stared at him, not with anger, but with a kind of tired clarity. "And your father," I said quietly, "wanted to be like Douglas Holt." 3 men, chasing the same shadow, and each one losing himself a little more along the way. He looked up then, eyes red, but not from tears, from realization, the kind that cuts deeper than punishment. "Dad wasn't evil," he whispered. "No," I said, "neither are you, but good men forget themselves when they confuse power with purpose." He pressed his palms flat on the glass, like a child trying to touch a memory. "I thought I could protect us," he said. "You, the house, everything, and instead," I replied, "you protected the lie that built it." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights above filled the space where love used to live. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I already have," I answered. "But that's not the same as forgetting." He blinked. "Confused. Forgiveness isn't erasing," I said. "It's remembering without the need to destroy." He nodded slowly, eyes wet now then, almost like a confession. He said, "I heard you threw away Dad's tape." "I did," I said, "because some truths don't deserve to live forever." He leaned back, whispering, "I wish I could start over." I smiled faintly. "You can. Just not from where you left off." When the guard came to end the visit, I stood but didn't move toward the door right away. He looked smaller, somehow, not just because of the uniform, but because he finally saw himself clearly. As I turned to leave, he said, "One last thing, Mom. Do you still wear Dad's watch?" He looked down at it on my wrist. "It wasn't ticking. It doesn't run anymore," I said. But it reminds me that time isn't about movement. It's about meaning outside. The sky was pale and endless. I sat in the car for a while. Before starting the engine, the road home was quiet. Just the hum of tires and the faint echo of words that would never need repeating that day. I understood something I hadn't before. Justice isn't about winning or losing, it's about seeing where the wound began, so the next generation doesn't bleed the same way. When I reached the lake, the water was still again. The watch caught a glint of fading sunlight. And for a second, it looked alive. Maybe it was to the mothers who still wait. I know the sound of silence after betrayal. It's not loud or sharp. It's the quiet hum that fills a house when no one comes home anymore. It's the sound of the chair across from you staying empty, day after day, as if the air itself has learned not to expect anything. I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting, that if I could just erase the pain, I'd be free. But forgiveness isn't erasing, it's remembering, without letting the memory chain you to the floor. There's a kind of strength that doesn't look like strength at all. It's in the way you still water your plants, still fold the laundry, still open the curtains each morning. Not because anyone will see you, but because light still deserves to enter your home. To the mothers who've been called too emotional, too naive, or too forgiving, you are none of those things. You are proof that gentleness survives even when love fails. And that survival, in itself, is a victory. I used to replay every word my son said, every choice I made that led us here, but I've learned something. Guilt is not a place to live, it's only a door. And one day, you must decide to walk through it. When you do, you'll find peace waiting, not the kind that comes with happy endings, but the quiet kind, the kind that lets you breathe again. Today, I water the garden by the lake. The flowers still bloom, stubborn and beautiful, though I forgot to plant new seeds this spring. The clock on my table still doesn't tick. Maybe it never will, but every morning, the sunlight finds it anyway, catches the glass, turns it gold for a moment, as if to say even what's broken can still reflect light. So if you're still waiting for an apology, for understanding, for the day your child remembers who you are, don't wait in sorrow, wait in dignity, wait in grace. And when the time comes, let forgiveness be your rebellion, because forgiveness doesn't mean surrender. It means reclaiming your freedom to feel joy again. Signed, a mother who finally learned that love can't always be returned, but it can always be renewed. A year later, I stood on a small stage inside the community center, by the lake. The same lake that once held my pain now held something new. Purpose. Behind me hung a simple banner, Silver Shield Foundation. In the front row sat people my age, some older, all with faces that had known loss, deceit, and quiet endurance. I took a breath and began to speak. I used to think aging meant fading, I said. But the truth is, aging is just remembering longer, and memory, when used with wisdom, can protect others. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. These past years, I continued, taught me one thing: old age is not weakness. It's moral intelligence, earned, not inherited. It's the kind of wisdom that can't be stolen, sold, or signed away. I glanced at the silver emblem on the lectern, 2 hands forming a shield. This foundation exists for one reason: to guard that intelligence, to teach those who've been silenced that silence itself can be power when it speaks with integrity. I paused, scanning the faces before me. Some were tearful, some were proud, some simply listened, as if they hadn't been listened to in years.